Let me wish you a warm welcome to this side event on the margins of the 10th Review Conference of the NPT titled Taking Forward Nuclear Risk Reduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Felix Baumann and I'm the permanent representative of Switzerland to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, and I have the pleasure to serve as the moderator for this event. Thank you also to you, Tony. Maybe I'll take one last question if there is any. I think there would be more than, but let me take the two gentlemen over there. Please be as short as possible.
Aaron Humphreys, on behalf of the Christian Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. While it's true that dialogue surrounding nuclear risk reduction is gaining in prominence, it is vital for states to remember that it is no substitute for nuclear disarmament and total elimination. As a UK-based NGO, we pay special attention to the position of the UK in these matters. I wondered if any of today's speakers would be able to recommend any further practical measures that the British government could take in relation to the topics covered during the session. I'd also like to invite anyone to explain how the following are consistent with the risk reduction agenda. First, the UK's decision to raise its nuclear cap. Second, the return of US nuclear weapons to RAF Lakenheath. And third, the continued deployment of US weapons in non-nuclear weapon states in Europe. I'd like to finish by also noting just how concerned my organisation is regarding the potential for Russian nuclear weapons to be deployed in Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you, and yes. So let me maybe start with you, Tong, if this is right for you.
Well, thank you. I'll briefly address the relationship between risk reduction and disarmament. I think if a country wants to really rely on nuclear deterrence, it will have to constantly remind people that the nuclear risk is real. It can really use nuclear weapons in a crisis. So in that sense, risk reduction forces a country to reduce its reliance on nuclear weapons. It forces a country to put nuclear weapons in the back burner of its national security strategy. So if that can be achieved, I think it's certainly very conducive to nuclear disarmament. On the issue of no first use, it's certainly a very helpful measure for reducing nuclear risk, and countries like China have adopted this policy. The challenge is nuclear use and non-use, the line between the two is becoming blurry. Because again, as Russia demonstrated, a country doesn't have to use nuclear weapons to achieve benefit. It can simply threaten or even implicitly threaten nuclear use to achieve coercive benefit. So I think one thing countries can do is to not only promise not to use nuclear weapons, but promise not to threaten to use nuclear weapons. But of course, here, the tricky part is how to define nuclear threat. I think that's where I think more discussion can happen. Thank you.
And then just lastly, on the fourth question about actual measures to reduce nuclear risk, at my company, we're quite fond of the idea of using crisis communications. It's something that we have heard discussed often in this RevCon. And it is one of those risk reduction measures that has been around for a long time, that has proven quite useful in the past. Obviously, the hotline between the United States and Russia has been used several times to varying effects, but overall it has been, in my opinion, risk reducing and stabilizing to know that in a moment of crisis, that line is there. And I think building on the network of crisis communications that we have today, especially as states modernize their arsenals, why not, for much cheaper, modernize their crisis communication systems?
Thank you, Leah, and this concludes our Q&A session. So before closing the event, as I said at the very beginning, it's my pleasure now to invite Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Alexandra Bell to provide some additional remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll start by saying I've gotten to speak from this dais before in my personal capacity, but today I will be speaking On behalf of the United States, I'll be on much better behavior. Thank you to my Dutch and Swiss colleagues and to UNIDIR for hosting this event, for allowing me to speak, and for all the work that you do to promote risk reduction. Following the Cuban Missile Crisis, leaders in Washington and Moscow worked together to construct guardrails against miscalculations and misperceptions that could lead to nuclear war. Those risk reduction measures were the foundation of treaties like the NPT. I hope it's abundantly clear and universally accepted that we do not need another Cuban Missile Crisis to show us that risk reduction continues to be vitally important. For our part, the United States is committed to advancing this work, but make no mistake, this is not something we simply do as busy work or a distraction or a substitute while bilateral arms control talks with other nations seem somewhat distant. This is something we must do, that all of us must do, to maintain and strengthen global security. Risk reduction is arms control. Arms control is risk reduction. This might seem obvious to people at the NPT RevCon or to people who came to this session, but it's not clear to so many people. That's actually a problem. Many people have gotten used to the idea that arms control can only come in the form of legally binding treaties approved by our respective legislatures. But arms control is so much more than that. It's military to military dialogues. It's scientific cooperation. It's the development of codes of conduct and norms of behavior, transparency and confidence building measures, best practices, political commitments, and of course, treaties. It is all these tools and mechanisms that can help us reduce the likelihood of nuclear war and reduce nuclear risks. As President Biden said, today, perhaps more than any other time since the Cold War, we must work to reduce nuclear risks of an arms race or nuclear escalation. We have to do better. We have to do more, not in spite of the challenges that we currently face, but because of them. We must also accept that we have a long road ahead of us. The instability and insecurity of the prevailing security environment inarguably affects our ability to advance arms control and, yes, disarmament, as does the lack of political will among relevant parties. But we must press on, and we will press on. Recalling the words of the late Michael Crapon, a giant in the field of arms control and disarmament, we should remember what we have accomplished in terms of risk reduction so far, despite the odds. He reminded us, and I quote, "Progress in our line of meaningful work is never linear. We live in hard times. All the more reason to remember this. Our aims are true. Our accomplishments fall short of our aims. Even so, our accomplishments are significant. The meaningful work, our work, has made this world a safer place. We have a lot more work to do." Michael was right about that, as he was about so many things. We have work to do. Risk reduction is a key part of that work. So let's get to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So just to cite one sentence you said: we need not another Cuban crisis to pursue nuclear risk reduction, and I think that's the call for our review conference, and that's also now concluding the event. Let me once again expressing really my deepest thanks to our panelists, Marion, Tong, Andre, and Leah. And also the teams of UNIDIR for organizing the event, the team of BASIC, the team of the Netherlands, and my own team, the Swiss team. Thank you to the audience for joining us for this event over lunch, and also for your active participation.